I came back to Sutler's Creek on a Tuesday in March, which was not the day I had planned on. I had not planned on any specific day, having learned at the Harker mine that making plans was a habit that the country had a way of correcting. And I came in on foot because my horse had thrown a shoe 12 miles out, and I had walked the rest rather than push him lame. It was a good walk. It gave me time to think about what I was going to say to Addie Crane. I had been thinking about what to say to Addie Crane for approximately 23 months, which is how long I had been at the Harker mine labor camp doing penance for a cattle theft I didn't commit. And in those 23 months I had composed and discarded a considerable number of speeches, explanations, and declarations, none of which had survived contact with the actual March air of Sutler's Creek. What I came up with in the end was nothing. I would walk in and see what the situation was and go from there. I was good at going from there. It was the arriving part I had always found complicated. I want to tell you what I knew before I went in, because what I knew shaped what I found, and what I found shaped the next 3 months of my life in ways I couldn't have planned if I'd tried. What I knew: my brother Cole had stolen 40 head of alderman cattle in the fall of 1880. Cole was 22, recently married, and had made a bad decision in a worse financial situation, and I was 31 and had the kind of character that made me say I did it when the county sheriff came asking, because what Cole did was foolish, but Cole was not a bad man, and I was the older brother, and that was what older brothers were for. I went to the Harker mine. Cole moved his wife and new baby 20 miles east and didn't know I was coming back. What I also knew, and had been knowing since the day I left: Addie Crane ran the best establishment in Sutler's Creek, and Jake Crane had been dead for a year before I left, and she was doing it alone, and the town respected her, and 1 or 2 men had already been respectfully discouraged from thinking of themselves as a replacement for Jake. And I had not said the thing I might have said before I left because I was 31 and apparently capable of extraordinary levels of idiocy in matters that actually counted. I walked into the Crane house at 2:30 in the afternoon. The Crane house was a saloon in the front and a boarding house in the back, with 6 rooms upstairs and a kitchen that produced the best food in Holman County. Jake Crane had built it in 1875, and Addie had run the kitchen from the first day and the whole operation since Jake died. I had eaten there more times than I could count, which is to say that it was the closest thing I had to a home in Sutler's Creek, a distinction I had not been smart enough to act on when I had the chance. The front room was quiet at that hour, 2 men at a back table I didn't know. The bar, which had been, when I left, a solid, well-stocked piece of furniture with 3 different whiskeys and a proper beer, was looking thin, not destitute, but thin. 2 bottles where there had been 6, glasses not quite as clean as Addie kept them. Addie herself came through the back door carrying a tray. She saw me. She set the tray down on the bar carefully, the way she did everything, with the precise economy of a woman who did not waste motion and did not waste expression. She looked at me for a moment. I have been looked at in a number of ways in my life, and that look was in a category of its own. "Cordvain," she said. "Addie," I said. "You look terrible," she said. "I've been walking since dawn," I said. "Threw a shoe 12 miles out." "Sit down," she said. "I'll get you coffee." She got me coffee. I sat at the bar. The 2 men at the back table paid no attention to either of us, being occupied with their own affairs. I drank the coffee, and she stood on the other side of the bar, and we looked at each other the way 2 people look at each other when they have a great deal to say, and neither of them is sure how to start the accounting. She started it. "I'm glad you're back," she said. "And I'm going to tell you something that isn't about you and me, because there's a situation here that I've been managing alone for 4 months, and I'm running out of ways to manage it." "Tell me," I said. She told me. What Addie told me took about 20 minutes, told in the flat, precise voice she used for problems. Not the voice of a woman asking for rescue, but the voice of a woman who has been keeping a ledger and wants someone else to see the numbers. Harlan Peck was the county's senior land broker, which was a title that meant he bought and sold property, and had been doing so long enough to have accumulated both a significant portfolio and a number of people who owed him various forms of obligation. He was not a violent man in the direct sense. He was the kind of man who didn't need to be, because he had other methods. He had wanted the Crane House property for 2 years, which was before Jake died. Jake had told him no. Addie had told him no when he asked again after Jake's death, which he did with what she described as a respectful interval of approximately 3 weeks. He had nodded and gone away, and for the first year he had stayed gone. Then 4 months ago, things had started to happen. The whiskey supplier, a man named Burl Oddies who had supplied the Crane House for 6 years without incident, had told Addie that he was having difficulty with his own supply chain and couldn't guarantee her regular deliveries. What she found out later, from Burl's wife, who was not as careful as Burl about what she said to whom, was that Peck had bought the interest on Burl's warehouse debt, and had suggested that the debt might be called if Burl's account of who he supplied changed in a certain direction. The liquor license. Sutler's Creek had a county licensing process that was largely a formality, administered by the county recorder's office. Addie's license had been renewed without issue for 3 years. In January, she had received a notice that her renewal was being challenged on the grounds that her establishment's proximity to the new Methodist church exceeded a distance restriction in the county ordinance. The Methodist church had been built in September. The restriction was real. The measurement, when Addie had it done herself, was off by 11 feet in the county's calculation, 11 feet that would, if accepted, put the Crane House in violation. The rumors. 3 of her boarding house regulars had moved to the other establishment in town, a place called the Western Star, run by a man named Oakes who was, as far as Addie could establish, not directly connected to Peck, but had benefited considerably from the recent shift in lodgers. Word in the county was that the Crane House was having trouble. In a place like Sutler's Creek, word of trouble became trouble if it went uncorrected long enough. She had not asked anyone for help. I want to be clear that she told me all of this not as a request but as a report, the same way she would have told her husband or a partner or anyone she trusted with the full picture. She was not asking me to solve it. She was telling me the situation. I drank my coffee and listened to the whole of it. When she finished, I said, "Who did the measurement on the church distance?" "Deputy clerk named Fenner," she said. "Is Fenner Peck's man or a straight clerk?" She thought about it. He might be straight and made an honest mistake. He might not be. "Get me the ordinance text," I said, "and the original surveyor's map of the block, and I need to know who holds Burl Oddies' warehouse note." She looked at me. "You're going to fix this." "I'm going to look at it," I said. "Looking at things is what I'm good at. Whether it fixes depends on what I find." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "You want a room?" "If you have one," I said. "I have 4, she said, dry. "Business isn't what it was." She gave me the corner room upstairs, which had a window looking out onto the main street and another looking toward the eastern range, and clean sheets and a proper bed that was approximately the finest thing I had encountered in 23 months. I slept for 10 hours and woke up at first light and went to work. The first thing I did was walk the distance from the front door of the Crane House to the front door of the Methodist church, which required only my 2 feet and a piece of string I had borrowed from Addie's kitchen. The distance restriction in the county ordinance was 40 yards. I measured it twice. The distance was 43 yards and some change. I went to the county recorder's office when it opened and asked to see the measurement filed by Deputy Clerk Fenner. Fenner had recorded 38 yards. I showed the recorder my own string. He looked at it with the expression of a man who has been handed a problem he didn't ask for. I said, "I'm not suggesting Fenner made the error deliberately. I'm suggesting the measurement wants to be redone by someone, who hasn't been involved in the prior measurement. The recorder, whose name was Bates, and who had the tired honesty of a man who keeps small county records and expects a quiet life, said he would see to it. The license challenge was based on Fenner's measurement. If the measurement was wrong, the challenge dissolved. That was one thing taken care of, or in the process of being taken care of. The second thing was Burl Oddie's warehouse note. I found the note holder through the county property records, which showed that a transfer of debt had occurred in November, 2 months before Addie's troubles started, from the Bellamy Range Savings Bank to a property holding company called Home and County Land Partners, which was, when I looked a little further into the county business registrations, a company whose principals included one Harlan Peck. I had not expected to find it quite this directly. Sometimes people are less careful than they should be. The third thing was the lawyer. His name was Asad Drummond, and he practiced out of Carswell, which was the county seat, 12 miles from Sutler's Creek. I had met Drummond twice in my life before the mine, and had formed the opinion that he was sharp, honest, and had a particular dislike for what he called the abuse of the paper record. I rode to Carswell on a horse I borrowed from the livery, and spent 2 hours with Drummond laying out what I had found. Drummond listened. He looked at the copies I had made of the relevant records. He said, "Peck has a land title problem of his own." I said I didn't know about that. He told me. The Peck family had acquired a piece of property on the north end of Sutler's Creek in 1872 through a sale that had been conducted, Drummond chose his words carefully, under circumstances that a sufficient examination of the original grant records would find interesting. The original grant had been made to a family named Harker, who had sold to an intermediary, who had sold to Peck's father, and the intermediary sale had certain irregularities that nobody had ever looked at carefully enough to worry about, primarily because nobody had reason to. If someone had reason to, and the time and willingness to look, what they would find was a title that had a question attached to it that Peck would find expensive to answer. I said, "I don't want to use that unless I have to." Drummond said, "You may not have to, but it's useful to know it exists." I said, "What I want is for the pressure on the Crane house to stop. I don't want Peck in court unless he forces it, because court takes time she doesn't have." Drummond nodded. "Then let me write a letter," he said. "I want to tell you about the weeks in between, because they were not only about Peck. I had a room at the Crane house, and I ate my meals in Addie's kitchen, and I worked on the various problems during the day, and in the evenings I sat at the bar with whatever business the saloon had and watched her work. She had a way of running a room that I had forgotten, or maybe just not paid enough attention to when I had the chance to observe it close. She was not a woman who performed warmth. She was genuinely warm in the specific, practical frontier way of someone who knew everyone by name, and remembered what they took in their coffee, and asked after their children without making a ceremony of it. What I was watching was someone doing the thing she was built for, and doing it under a pressure that was trying to make it impossible, and continuing to do it anyway. On the third evening I was there, she came and sat at the end of the bar after the last customer left, which she had not done while I was there before. She poured herself a small glass of the better whiskey and looked at the bar's surface. "Cole's all right," she said. "As far as I know," I said. "I haven't been to see him yet." "You should." "I will," I said, "after." She looked at me. "After what?" "After this is sorted." She was quiet for a moment. "You came back to sort this." "I came back," I said. "The sorting presented itself." She turned her glass on the bar. "I heard you went to the mine for coal." "You heard right." "He know you're back?" "Not yet." She looked at me for a long time in the lamplight, not the way she looked at a problem with that flat, accounting intelligence, but differently, with something more personal in it. "Cord," she said. "Yes." "I need to say something that isn't about the current situation." Go ahead. She looked at her glass. Before you left, I knew there was something that hadn't been said between us. I didn't say anything because it didn't feel like the right time, and then you were gone before I found a right time, and 2 years is a long time to think about whether you said the right thing or the wrong thing. I was quiet. I think I should have said something, she said. I think we both should have. I'm not going to pretend the situation is the same now that it was then, because we're both different people, and I don't know what 2 years in a mine camp does to a man, and you don't know what 2 years of running this place alone does to a woman. She paused. But I'm not going to pretend there's nothing there either. I looked at her across the bar. There's something there, I said. She nodded as if this confirmed something she had calculated. Good, that's an honest accounting. It is, I said. We'll see what happens with the rest of it, she said. She finished her glass and said good night and went to her room behind the kitchen. And I sat at the bar for another hour and thought about what it meant to have finally said the thing that should have been said 2 years and 23 months ago, in the plainest possible terms, and found it was still there waiting. I went to see Cole on a Thursday, on the borrowed livery horse. Cole's ranch was 20 miles east, a small operation on a piece of ground that was going to be good range in 10 years when Cole got the water right. His wife Bess answered the door and looked at me with the expression of a woman who has been half expecting and half dreading something for 2 years. Cole came out of the barn and stopped when he saw me. We stood in the yard for a moment. Cord, he said. Cole, I said. He crossed the yard and embraced me in the rough, brief way of frontier men who are not accustomed to expressing things directly and are doing their best. I returned it. He held me at arm's length and looked at me. He had aged some, which was fair, so had I. He had the look of a man who has been carrying a thing and trying to carry it without showing it. I didn't know, he said, about you going to the mine. I found out 6 months after. I nearly came to get you out. I know, I said. That's why I didn't tell you beforehand. He looked at me steadily. That's the stupidest thing you've ever done. Probably, I said. He looked at his boots. I was going to pay it back. Pay you back somehow. You can pay me back by raising good cattle and not stealing any more of them, I said. He looked up, and something in his face that had been tight for 2 years eased. Bess fed me dinner and we talked until late, and I told him I was in Sutler's Creek for the time being, staying at the Crane house, working through something. He asked about Addie. I said she was managing. He gave me a look that suggested he had an opinion about my situation with Addie that he was wisely keeping to himself, which from Cole was a considerable exercise of self-restraint. I rode back to Sutler's Creek in the dark and came in through the Crane house back door and found Addie in the kitchen, which was not unusual. She was often in the kitchen at that hour doing the next day's preparation. Cole all right, she said without turning from the stove. He's all right, I said, building something decent out there. She nodded, good. I sat down at the kitchen table. The kitchen was warm and smelled of bread and coffee and the particular quality of a room where someone has been working all day. I had been in a great many rooms in my life, and this was the one I wanted to be in. Drummond's letter went out today, I said, by courier to Peck's office. She turned then. What did it say? It laid out the measurement error on the license challenge, the debt transfer records connecting home and county land partners to Peck, and the original Harker grant situation on his north property. It did not make threats. It presented facts and noted that these facts were now in the possession of a licensed attorney and would be made available to the county recorder and the home and county land office if the current pressure on the Crane house property and business did not cease within 10 days. She was quiet for a moment. He'll know it was you, she said. He'll know someone did it, I said. He can guess. The point isn't who did it. The point is that the information exists and he knows it exists. Will it work? It's going to work, I said. Peck is a careful man. He doesn't do things that can't be walked back. This can be walked back if he stops now. If he pushes it to court, it can't." She looked at me for a long moment. "You found all of this in 2 weeks," she said. "The information was there," I said. "Nobody had looked at it because nobody had a reason to yet." "I didn't have a lawyer," she said. "Now you do," I said. "Drummond likes you, by the way. He said you're the kind of client that makes his work worthwhile." She almost smiled at that. Not quite, but close. The letter worked. Not immediately and not dramatically. There was no moment where Peck came to the Crane house and made a declaration. What happened was that the pressure simply stopped, the way a leak stops when you find the right joint and seal it. The license challenge was quietly withdrawn. The recorder's remeasurement came back at 43 yards and change, and the challenge had no basis to stand on. Burl Oddys appeared at Addie's back door 10 days after the letter went out and told her he would resume regular deliveries and that his previous difficulties had resolved themselves. He didn't elaborate and she didn't ask. The lodgers started coming back. Not all of them immediately, and not because anything dramatic had changed, but because the Crane house was the better establishment and people who stayed there knew it, and the word of trouble that had been circulating had a way of fading when there was nothing fresh to feed it. I saw Harlan Peck once, across the main street, about 3 weeks after the letter. He was a man of perhaps 55, well-dressed, with the particular expression of a man who has absorbed an unpleasant piece of information and is determining how to proceed with his dignity intact. He looked at me. I looked at him. Neither of us spoke. He moved on. That was all. Addie reopened the full bar in April, with the proper stock and the proper glasses and the 3 whiskeys that had been there when I first came to Sutler's Creek. She did it on a Friday evening, which was the Crane house's best night, and the room was full by 7 o'clock with people who had been waiting for it to be what it had been. I sat at my usual place at the bar and watched. The room had the quality it had always had under Addie's management: warm, competent, specific. She knew everyone who came through the door and they knew her. And what they got at the Crane house was not just a drink and a meal, but the particular comfort of a place that was run by someone who cared whether you were all right. Harker County's finest establishments had never had that quality and never would. Around 9 o'clock, she came and stood at the bar near where I was sitting, attending to the glass cleaning that she did while keeping half an eye on the room. We were not alone. There were 20 people in that room, but there was a particular quality of the space between us that the room around us didn't intrude on. "Drummond sent his final account," she said. "I know," I said. "I settled it." She looked at me, cord. "Consider it what it is," I said. 2 years is a long time. I was not paying much for room and board. The account balances. She was quiet for a moment, doing the arithmetic on this in the way she did arithmetic, quickly and completely. "It doesn't balance," she said, "but I'll allow it." "Generous of you," I said. Something moved in her face, the thing that wasn't quite a smile but preceded one. "You're going to stay," she said. It wasn't a question. "If you'll have me," I said. She looked at me steadily across the bar with the expression I had been thinking about for 23 months, which I understood now was the expression she reserved for things she had decided about. The calculating look was for things she was still calculating. This one meant the calculation was done. "You can stay," she said. "As long as you're useful." "I intend to be useful for a long time," I said. "Good," she said. "I'll hold you to that." She went back to the room, and I sat at the bar and watched the Friday evening of the Crane house at its best, full and warm and properly run, and thought about what it meant to have come back to a place you had been too slow to claim the first time, and found it still worth claiming. I thought about Cole, 20 miles east, building something decent. I thought about 2 years of hard labor that had not made me bitter, which surprised me when I examined it, but there it was. I had paid a price I was willing to pay. What I was looking at now was what was on the other side of it. Addie came back around midnight after the last customer and sat at the end of the bar with her small glass of the better whiskey, which I had come to understand was the signal that the evening's work was done, and whatever came next was not work. "What are you thinking about?" she said. "What's on the other side of things?" I said. She looked at her glass. "And what's on the other side?" I looked at the room, the clean glasses and the proper bottles and the warm lamp and the door that was still hers. "This," I said, "this is what's on the other side." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she held up her glass slightly, not as a toast exactly, but as a plain acknowledgement of the thing that had been said. I raised my coffee cup. We sat there in the quiet of the closed Crane house, not saying much else, because what needed saying had been said, and the rest of it would take care of itself in the time and manner that things take care of themselves when the right people are in the right place, and neither of them is going anywhere. That was March of 1883. By June we were married, which I mention not because the ceremony was extraordinary. It was 11 minutes at the county recorder's office in Carswell, with Drummond and Bess Vane as witnesses, but because Addie asked me to be specific about it when I was telling this to Drummond's son 40 years later, who was writing something down and wanted the dates. The Crane house is still there. Addie ran it for 30 years and I worked alongside her for all of them, which was the best work I ever did. Cole's ranch became the second largest operation in Homan County. Bess and Cole had 4 children, the oldest of which is named after me in a way I told Cole was unnecessary, and have been quietly proud of since the day he was born. Harlan Peck moved his operation to the county seat eventually, which was his prerogative, and the North property question never came to court because I never had reason to press it. The information sat in Drummond's files and did its work by existing. What I wanted to tell Drummond's son, when he asked me how it had happened, how a man came back from 2 years in a labor camp and ended up with everything worth having, was that it was not luck and it was not cleverness, though I used some of both. What it was this. I came back to a place where someone was being treated wrongly by a man who thought he could take what he wanted because nobody was going to stop him, and I stopped him. And I came back to a woman who had been keeping a door shut alone for 4 months, and I stood on the other side of it for a while, and eventually she opened it. Some things are that simple. Not easy, but simple.